And he said, well, you failed to safeguard this material. And I says, wait a minute. Now, I got it in a fax at about 10 o'clock in the evening. I took it to bed with me and literally slept on it and brought it to you first thing this morning. Now, I don't know of any government office that's open at 10 o'clock at night. So I safeguarded it. I know it was not compromised. So anyway, I was somewhat disgusted, and I walked out of the interview. The next morning when I came into work, some of the guards says, Ron, what did you do? And I thought, uh-oh, they're really going to drop the axe on me today.
Right.
Well, it turns out Carl was terminated that previous day after I left.
He was terminated?
He was terminated. I went and talked to the head of security and asked, what's going on? And he says, nothing. Go back to work.
Huh.
I don't know if they attempted to plug the leak. It was never talked about, and I've learned in this business, Daryl can probably confirm this, if you don't think you might not like the answer, don't ask the question.
I can tell you that for a tremendous certainty. When I was in the Central Intelligence Agency, I made the mistake of revealing some things about our security problems on a top-secret installation.
Yes.
The individual I related to looked at me. He was white as a sheet when I related to him, and then he looked at me and said, why in the world would you make that kind of a statement? And I said, well, the tumblers on the lock of that particular building can be heard, and you can actually tell, how to break into this thing just by listening to tumblers. He says, have you ever done that? And I said, no, I have not. He said, well, how would you know that? I said, well, you used to be a safecracker before you got in the company, didn't you? And he looked at me for a long time and very red-faced, and finally he admitted he was. But the next day, in a major meeting, the chief of station and the chief of security, this guy's boss, were standing there with about 30 other people, and the chief of security stood up and said, if anybody ever gets caught near this certain building, and he looks at me and says, tampering with those locks, or even if I think you're near that building, I promise you 40 years in prison and no one will ever know where you're at. I looked at the chief of station, who liked me very well and had sent a number of my items up to Langley, and noticed that he wasn't smiling at all. And I knew that guy was telling the truth. The last time I did my good turn.
Yeah, how can you guys work for people like this?
You don't. You quit. I did.
Yeah, it's sort of like being in a grade B movie, and you want to see how it turns out.
Excellent analogy. Excellent.
So you finally get fed up. What about the people?
Well,
This is really a more important question. I'm very glad that you guys were that way, and I can understand why you'd get fed up and quit. While I enjoyed my stay in the Air Force, I found the way they did things was not particularly to my liking, and I was more independent, so I left. I mean, it's kind of the same psychology, only you guys even had it worse. Now, what I want to ask you about is the guys who stay, the guys who can digest all this and stay. What does that mean we end up with in the CIA, in the spy satellite business, the people who can integrate into the kind of system we're just talking about right now? What kind of quality of people end up being lifers?
Well, I can talk about the aerospace business a little bit. For one thing, we're right there on the cutting edge, and that's exciting and that's challenging, and it's professionally it's wonderful. I would venture that probably less than 1% of the engineers that I know of would give a hoot and a holler about UFOs or anything like that.
Yeah,
and so they really suffer from the old ostrich complex. Keep your head in the sand and do your work, and when your head's in the sand, you know where your hindquarters are.
Don't make any waves.
Yeah, but they're doing something that's exciting and challenging, and they really believe the whole story, and I do too for a lot of it. I think we do an outstanding job, and after all, it was the defense business that brought down the Soviet Union. We've kept this country free and safe for quite a few years. And that's not to say we're not without our faults, but there's some mighty good people doing some outstanding work there. And not ashamed at all to say I'm proud to be a part of it. But there's also some shady characters, and those are the ones that we don't want to talk about too much, or expose them if we can.
Well, what is, Daryl, the CIA doing these days? Do you have any sense of what their main missions are? Are they as active as ever? Has the ending of the Cold War, put them out of business, or what's going on?
The CIA is not out of business, never will be out of business as long as people are paranoid that are in government, and we'll fund it, and as long as we pay taxes to support that mentality.
Well, there's no shortage of paranoia.
And there's no shortage of money. My tax situation ought to prove that. As Ron and I were discussing that on the phone just before you came on, when you were talking about the taxes, I was audited twice this year.
Uh-huh.
And both occasions, they said I owed $37,000. And after both audits, they looked at me, so just strange. She just couldn't figure out why I didn't owe a penny. But I had to spend about $3,500 to prove to them I didn't owe a thing.
Why do you think you were audited?
Well, 2 times in a row on the same situation with 2 different tax auditors. This is rather curious to me. My tax auditing problem started after I got out of the CIA. I did not leave on the best of terms with them. In fact, I brought a congressional investigation on the company before I left.
Oh.
Chairman Mendel Rivers of the House Armed Services Committee headed it.
Oh.
So I ended up exiled to Ascom, Korea for my efforts.
Well, that's not necessarily particularly unusual, is it? I mean, people who leave the agency in a less than stellar light.
It happens.
It happens.
It really happens. I've had an unusual amount of audits ever since then. So 2 this year was unusual, especially since I didn't owe them a penny and they admitted it.
Remarkable. Well, anyway, back to the business of what can and can't be seen. Daryl, do you have any way of confirming what Ron is saying about what we have seen with our satellites?
The best way I can confirm that independently and without any violation of in any sense of the word concerning my clearance status, which is now secret. It was top secret. It's been administratively reduced to secret now. The independent way to do that, and the collaboration that Ron and I have come into, is to take cases, the finest cases that I feel like I have, and try to establish those times, dates, and places with the exact findings that he has in his research, which he's acquired quite legally. And some of these are showing up as some rather remarkable. Well, what we have in effect is the United States government's spy satellite proving a UFO was at an abduction location during the same time. This is phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Ron, I know this is a question that is going to be hard. You don't happen to have possession of any of these satellite photographs, do you?
No. What I do have is, in my book, I have 6 pages of fast walker reports, line after line after line of fast walker reports.
Right.
And I say we'll use the definition that Jacques Vallée uses in his book, Fast Walker, and use that for our working definition.
Okay.
And
now let me rephrase the question. Have you seen any of these satellite photographs?
Okay, I have not seen satellite photographs, no, of detecting UFOs. Let me explain the differences between the two.
All right.
The satellite data that I have is from one that's in geosynchronous orbit.
Yes.
And it's a non-imaging satellite. We have visual sensors, infrared and ultraviolet, along with some that are in other
spectrums,
areas of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And we send out a digital signal. We do a little bit of processing on board, and then we send out a digital signal, and then match those data against what we call a time intensity profile. And what that is let's assume for the moment that a match and a little flash bulb have the same amount of energy in them.
Okay.
A flash bulb goes out and it releases its energy very, very quickly.
Boom.
Whereas a match might have the same amount of energy, but it'll release it over a 30-second time span.
Correct.
So each target that we look at has a different time intensity profile. And so when we detect something, the computers will attempt to match that time intensity profile with one that's stored in the database, and then give us a best fit or a best match.
In other words, like a submarine, you're trying to, submarines, I understand, can, from a sound signature, identify the specific name of an enemy submarine because that signature has been recorded previously. So you're doing the same kind of matching work.
Right, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And so we can then categorize what the targets are that we're looking at.